Okay, so Linda, I'll have you go ahead.
Okay. Amy, I was pleased and delighted when you asked me to do this for many reasons. I'm going to read directly from the bio that Ramin gave me. I was born in Tehran, Iran. My family's ancestry is Jewish. However, my great grandparents joined the Baha'i religion. I was raised as a Baha'i, but did not immediately join it myself. It is a requirement of our faith for each person to search for his and her self and decide what path they want to follow. That is similar to the Unitarian Church Around the Corner program we do for, is it 7th graders? It seems that they visit many churches and make decisions. Not all of them decide to be UUs. My extended family are Baha'i, Jewish, Christian, as in Presbyterian, Catholic, and Evangelical. They are Muslims and of no religion. I attended high school and college in England and Scotland, respectively, and came to the US in 1976 for my graduate studies in chemical engineering. My wife, Diana, and I have lived in Needham about 35 years. We raised our 2 children here. I am now a business and technical advisor to US and European companies. I have been involved in several Needham organizations that promote racial harmony, elimination of prejudices, and increased diversity in our community. Personally, I want to thank you, Ramin, for your calm and effective voice in every group I've ever been a member of. I know you as a most kind and thoughtful friend. Take it away.
Okay. And actually, Ramin, before you get started, I'm going to mute everybody. And then if you could unmute yourself, that would be great.
All right. I prepared a PowerPoint presentation. And let me explain. Do you see my PowerPoint presentation? Do you see it?
Yes.
Okay. So I was just explaining before we started the meeting that this was a harder job than I thought. The Baha'i faith is not just a community for me. It's really the essence of my being. It's what makes me. When I'm sad, I turn to it. When I'm looking for guidance, I look to it. It's something that it's so part of me that to try to present it is sometimes is difficult. We don't proselytize in the Baha'i faith in the sense that we don't try to make people become a Baha'i. We are very eager to discuss it and talk about it if we are asked. So I thought what I will do tonight is give you a story of how the faith started, talk about its central figures and some of its principles. And I will try to do this by going to, as much as possible without becoming boring, going to the texts, the scriptures. And I will not cover everything that you see written on a slide, but I have made the copy of this as a PDF available to Tony, Amy, and Linda. And I'm sure if you want to see it afterwards, they will send you a copy, or if you send me information, I'll send it to you. So let me start the story in the 1840s. There were amazing things taking place, both in the East and the West. In the West, in the US, a preacher, a Baptist preacher by the name of William Miller, had studied the Bible and come to the conclusion that the second coming of Christ was imminent. He had convinced at least tens of thousands of people. By the way, Miller is from Massachusetts, and his family had moved to New York. He had set a time between 1843, March of 1843 and 1844 as that coming. And several times people had asked him to come up with a specific date, and he would come with a specific date, and those specific dates, as many as 100,000 people would gather in the farms up here in Northeast, in New England and New York, expecting the skies to open and Jesus to return. In fact, I love this story where John Potter at a sand school closed the school and said he's not going to show up because he would be up there in the sky somewhere. And in, oops, why is this not working? And in Germany, a group of Christians sold everything they had because they had come to the conclusion that Jesus was going to return on the slopes of Mount Carmel. So they moved to Haifa, which is today Israel, and then it was part of the Ottoman Empire. They built a colony, which is to this day is called the German or the Templar colony. Many of those homes still exist. And it's interesting that on the headstone of each house, it was written in German, "The Lord is near." Similarly, in the Middle East, there was a great sense of expectation by the Muslim groups and sects about the coming of this promised one that was prophesied both in the Bible and in the Quran. And in the Shia Islam, they called him the hidden Imam or the Mahdi. And people were traveling across the country looking for this promised one to arrive. So I'll take you to May 23rd, 1844, when two men were engaged in a conversation. One, the host, was a young man. He was a merchant, about 25 years old. And the other was an elderly, very prominent clergy, and a leader of a sect who, like the Millerites in the West, had come to the conclusion that the coming of the promised one was imminent. And they were traveling to different parts of the Middle East, Iraq and Iran mostly, in a prayerful condition and fasting and looking for the promised one. So the young merchant, whose name was Sayyid Ali Muhammad, and later on he took the title the Bab, which means the gate, over a long night of conversation, claimed to his guest that he was that promised one. Of course, the guest was a bit skeptical, but he had requirements and conditions of prophecies to be fulfilled. Most of them had to do with revealing commentaries on the chapters of the Quran. And by the morning, he was convinced that his host was that promised one. And the Bab said that he was the latest in the series of prophets and messengers from God, and he had come to prepare the world for the imminent coming of one greater than himself, to renew religion of God, and that would going to establish world peace, the most great peace. After that, the Bab's message spread like wildfire in Iran and the Middle East. Many thousands turned to him, especially many of the clergy. And that obviously triggered a sense of fear and also brought great opposition and suppression of the religion. And the Bab himself was arrested and he was sent from one prison to another prison. And some of these pictures you see are some of the forts that he was imprisoned in. So I tell you a little story of one, and then we'll come back to that later on. In one of the times that the Bab was in one of these prisons, the one in the middle, he asked for a candle so that he could use the light to read the messages that his followers were sending to him, and also be able to write. And he was denied that. Eventually, the Bab was executed, was put to death under very dramatic conditions. He was in jail. He was dictating something to one of his followers who was in jail with him. They came to take him, and he said, he's not ready. They said, they're going to take him. He said, it's not ready, it's not going to happen. But they forced him, they took him, they tied his hands, and they hung him to be executed. After the 250 riflemen shot, they saw the Bab was not there. The ropes were cut, and he was not there to be found. And they went and looked for him, and they found him finishing up his dictation. And when he was done, he said, okay, I'm ready, you can do this. This was witnessed by like 10,000 people. It's an interesting story, but what was very interesting about it is that the British agent, and the British had agents all over the world and all over Persia or Iran at that time, got a report of this to the Foreign Office. And the record of this report is, I quoted here. I'm not going to read it, but it's there if you want to see it later on. This is a quote from the writings of the Bab. He wrote, "O peoples of the earth, verily the resplendent light of God had appeared in your midst, invested with this unerring book, that ye may be guided aright to the ways of peace, and by the leave of God, step out of the darkness into the light and unto this far extended path of truth." I don't know why this button doesn't work. Just excuse me a little bit. Okay, here we go. So after the execution of the Bab, the rate of the, after the execution, the rate of the persecution increased quite extensively, quite rapidly, especially after two of his followers made an attempt on the life of the Shah, which was stupid, but they did it, and that even made it worse. About 20,000 were put to death. And again, many of these were observed by the foreigners at that time, Austrians, French, Russians, and British, who were present in Iran at that time. One of those who was arrested was a nobleman from a very wealthy land-owning family with connections to the court. His name was Mirza Hussein Ali Nuri. That means he was from the province of Nur. He was one of the first followers of the Bab, and the Bab had given him the title Baha'u'llah, which means the glory of God in Arabic. This is one of the houses, the picture on the right is one of the houses of Baha'u'llah. So Baha'u'llah was arrested as part of those persecutions and arrests, and he was put into the infamous Black Pit of Tehran in 1852. I use his own words to describe what he experienced there. "We were consigned for 4 months to a place foul beyond comparison. The dungeon was wrapped in thick darkness, and our fellow prisoners numbered nearly 150 souls. No pen can depict that place, nor any tongue describe its loathsome smell. Every day, our gaolers entering our cell would call the name of one of our companions, bidding him arise and follow them to the foot of the gallows. With what eagerness would the owner of that name respond to that solemn call? Relieved of his chains, he would spring to his feet and in a state of uncontrollable delight would proceed to die as dauntlessly as he had lived. It was also during the time that, let me see if I can, yeah, during the time that Baha'u'llah was in this prison, in this black pit, that he had the first premonitions of his mission and what was his responsibility. So again, I'm not going to read too many of these, but I read this couple of quotes. During the days I lay in the prison of Tehran, thou, the galling weight of the chains and the stench-filled air, allowed me but little sleep. Still in those infrequent moments of slumber, I felt as if something flowed from the crown of my head over my breast, even as a mighty torrent that precipitated itself upon the earth from the summit of a lofty mountain. Every limb of my body would, as a result, be set afire. One night in a dream, these exalted words were heard on every side. Verily, we shall render thee victorious by thyself and by thy pen. Grieve thou not for that which had befallen thee. Neither be thou afraid, for thou art in safety. Ere long will God raise up the treasures of the earth, men who will aid thee through thyself and through thy name, wherewith God had revived the hearts of such as have recognized him. Baha'u'llah's life was spared, and he and his family, they had, having lost everything that they had, of course, were exiled to the province Baghdad, which was a provincial capital in the Ottoman Empire. And there started 39 years of basically exile and imprisonment for him. Baha'u'llah in total spent about 10 years in Iraq. 8 of those 8 years, 10 years was in the city of Baghdad, and 2 years he traveled as a hermit. He wandered around the mountains of Kurdistan. That was the time in the wilderness for him. And again, his reputation, the affection of people for him, the flow of pilgrims to come and see him grew. And so the Iranian government insisted that the Ottomans take him even further away from the Iranian border. While he was in Baghdad, Baha'u'llah wrote 2 very significant books in the Baha'i right that we have. One is called The Hidden Words, and there's a story behind why it's called those words, but let's just leave it at that. And the other is called The Book of Certitude. The Hidden Words, Baha'u'llah explains that he has taken, or God has taken, if you will, the essence of what had been revealed by the prophets of the past, and as he puts it, clothed it in the garment of brevity. It consists of 153 aphorisms. Here are the 2 first ones. Goes the first one: O son of spirit, my first counsel is this: possess a pure, kindly, and radiant heart, that thine may be a sovereignty, ancient, imperishable, and everlasting. And the other one is, O son of spirit, the best beloved of all things in my sight is justice. Turn not away therefrom, if thou desirest me. The Book of Certitude, Baha'u'llah wrote it in 48 hours in response to a set of questions that were put to him by people, by some clergy, if you will, about the meaning of what is religion, and how do these various religions relate to each other. I read a couple of quotes from this, and then I'll explain it a little bit. And this is very important for understanding the fundamental principles of the Baha'i faith. So Baha'u'llah wrote, God, the unknowable essence, the divine being, is immensely exalted above every human attribute. Far be it from his glory that human tongue should adequately recount his praise, or that human heart comprehend his fathomless mystery. Basically, Baha'u'llah taught that God, by definition, God's essence is unknowable. That no matter how hard we try, it's like a table trying to understand the carpenter. That we are not capable of understanding the essence of God, However, he goes on to say, the door of the knowledge of the Ancient of Days, that is God, being thus closed in the face of all beings, the source of infinite grace hath caused those luminous gems of holiness, these are prophets, messengers, to appear out of the realm of the spirit in the noble form of the human temple, and be made manifest unto all men, that they may impart unto the world the mysteries of the unchangeable being, and tell of the subtleties of his imperishable essence. In other words, Baha'u'llah says, God being so unknowable, the essence of God, we learn about the Creator through these prophets, these messengers. He calls them manifestations of God, that God has given us this to be, to communicate to us about the Creator. Another quote that now brings it about the rest of the relationship between the various founders of religions is, I'm trying to move this picture out of the way. Okay, these sanctified mirrors, these day springs of ancient glory, are one and all the exponents on earth of him who's the central orb of the universe, its essence and ultimate purpose. From him proceed their knowledge and power. From him is derived their sovereignty. The beauty of their countenance is but a reflection of his image, and their revelation a sign of his deathless glory. They are the treasuries of divine knowledge and the repositories of celestial wisdom. Through them is transmitted a grace that is infinite, and by them is revealed the light that can never fade. In other words, all the founders of the religions, Christ, Moses, Muhammad, the Buddha, Abraham, all derive their influence and their inspiration from the same source, which is the Creator. I know that Bob has his hand. Robert, Bob, you have your hand up. Can you wait until the end of the presentation? Maybe I'll cover the answer to your question, and we can talk about it later. So Baha'u'llah's influence having increased then, he was exiled, he was sent, he was ordered to go to Constantinople. And on the eve of his departure, Baha'u'llah publicly, if you will, proclaimed to his companions that he was that promised one foretold by the Bab, and that he was the one that had been expected to appear, and that he is the inaugurator of a new dispensation. He was in Constantinople at that time, which is called Istanbul now, for about 4 months before again being exiled under very severe conditions in the most, one of the coldest winters, to the city of Adrianople or Edirne, which is actually on the European continent, is a piece of the European continent. Even though Baha'u'llah was under very severe conditions in Adrianople, yet the volume and extent of his writings continued. Many letters he wrote went around, were spread to his followers. And one of the most significant things that Baha'u'llah wrote during that time were a series of letters or epistles to the then kings and rulers of both Europe and Asia. Napoleon, Tsar Alexander, Kaiser Wilhelm, Queen Victoria, Pope Pius IX, Nasruddin Shah for Iran, and Abdulaziz of Ottoman Empire. In these letters, first Baha'u'llah openly proclaimed his station as a manifestation of God, like Jesus, Muhammad, and Moses. He said he was the next revealer of God's attributes. And he urged these leaders very specifically to pursue justice and disarmament, and also exhorted them to band together into a commonwealth of nations, warning them of the dire consequences should they fail to establish peace. He wrote things like, compose your differences and reduce your armaments. Decide justly between men. Know ye that the poor are the trust of God in your midst. Watch that you betray not his trust. And he said, very clear warnings. If ye pay no heed, divine chastisement shall assail you from every direction. One of those kings was Napoleon III, who was at the time the most powerful king or emperor in Europe. So he received a letter from this prisoner in Adrianople, that was very long. And in that, Baha'u'llah called the hypocrisy of Napoleon, because Napoleon had claimed to be a reformer, yet he had started a war, the Crimea War, and he had been exploiting his people. So Baha'u'llah said, for what thou hast done, thy kingdom shall be thrown into confusion, and thine empire shall pass from thine hands as a punishment for that which thou hast wrought. Then wilt thou know how thou hast plainly erred. Commotions shall seize all the people in that land. I must say that this letter, when it was published, when it was written, we can trace the way it sort of would make its way to Paris, if you will. But it also, people made copies and distributed it. So for a long time, people were wondering, wait a minute, here is this prisoner writing to this king, and the king is in the zenith of his power. How is this going to work? Well, as we know, he lost to the Prussian. He started the war against Prussia, and everybody expected him to win that war. But he was defeated, and France was occupied by Prussia, and he was sent to exile outside of France. Again, as Baha'u'llah's influence grew, and people, population and the local authorities began to be attracted to him, the Sultan decided that they should send him to a place that for sure will finish him. And where they chose was the city of Akka, the prison city of Akka. Akka was probably the last Crusader fort in Palestine. And it was the place where they would send their most hardened prisoners. It was such a foul place that the saying went that if a bird flew over it, it would drop dead because of the stench. Baha'u'llah basically spent the rest of his life on this earth in Akka and its vicinity. At the beginning, the conditions were very severe. One of his sons died, and many other of his followers and family members who were in this exile were put to death. But slowly the population became attracted to him and would start giving him, and officials, even though it was against the central government's orders, would give him better freedom to move around and accommodations, that he could have better accommodations. In 1890, Professor Edward Brown, who was a very famous Orientalist, met Baha'u'llah and left this pen portrait that is the only one that we have. He wrote, "The face of him on whom I gazed, I can never forget. Though I cannot describe it. Those piercing eyes seemed to read one's very soul. Power and authority sat on that ample brow. No need to ask in whose presence I stood. I bowed myself before one who's the object of a devotion and love which kings might envy and emperors sigh for in vain." And Baha'u'llah told him that all nations should become one in faith and all men as brothers, that the bonds of affection and unity between sons of men should be strengthened, that diversity of religion should cease and differences of race be annulled. What harm is there in this? Yet so it shall be. These fruitless wars, these fruitless strifes, these ruinous wars shall pass away and the most great peace shall come. Let not a man glory in this, that he loves his country. Let him rather glory in this, that he loves his kind. On November 1892, Baha'u'llah passed away, and he is buried outside of Akka, which is now Israel. Baha'u'llah, one of the fortunate things that we have is that there are hundreds of books and episodes and letters that Baha'u'llah had written, and we have the original.
I can try.
Sorry, is something wrong? Is everything okay?
I think so. I think somebody is not muted.
Oh, okay.
Could everybody make sure that they're on mute?
So, can I go on?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, quickly. We have the body of his literature, and many of them are translated into English and other languages. Some of his other writings, verily I say, the human soul is in its essence one of the signs of God, a mystery among his mysteries. It is one of the mighty signs of the Almighty, the harbinger that proclaimeth the reality of all the worlds of God. And then, you are the fruits of one tree and the leaves of one branch. Deal one with one another with the utmost love and harmony, etc. So I'll go on. So what are some of Baha'i practices? As a Baha'i, what do we practice? One is we have daily obligatory prayers. We have a choice of 3 of them that we can choose one. We don't have to say all 3. We can pick one of them. There's a short one, which I quoted here. It's 1 paragraph. There's a medium one, and there's a long one that you can pick. Depending on your mood and since you are, you can pick one and say this, but you have to say it every day. It's obligatory. We have a new calendar. Our calendar consists of 19 months of 19 days each, plus 4 or 5 what we call intercalary days. We are obligated to daily meditate and reflect on our day and what we're going to do, and in personal and communal prayers, we can choose any words, use any words that we wish. However, we do have a very extensive body of prayers that are revealed by the central figures of our faith that we tend to want to say those more often. We don't have any dietary restrictions, except we don't drink alcohol or take psychedelic drugs. We have a fasting period where we fast from sunrise to sunset. It's usually the last month of the year, which is the month before the 1st of the spring, which is 21st of March. And we have monthly, which are Baha'i monthly, community gatherings for devotions and community consultation. We don't have any clergy or individual leaders, but we have local elected assemblies. We engage in community building through social economic projects, children, junior youth, and youth programs and activities. And we are forbidden to participate in partisan political activities. In terms of fundamental teachings of Baha'u'llah, I already mentioned the fact that Baha'u'llah teaches that human beings are spiritual beings, and this life is part of the journey of that human soul. He likens it to the growth of the fetus in the womb, that in the womb, the fetus is growing arms, eyes, legs, lungs, none of which it's needed in the matrix of the womb, but there are preparations in anticipation of the next place of existence for that child, which is this world, that it's going to need the arm and the leg and the heart, etc. And Baha'u'llah says that in this world, we are to acquire qualities of love, justice, humility, knowledge, selflessness, and kindness, which are the arms and legs of the next part of our journey. He describes that the Creator, known by different names, has throughout the time has revealed himself to humanity through these individuals that Baha'u'llah calls manifestations of God. So we look at Jesus, look at Moses, Buddha, Baha'u'llah, others as all being from the same Creator. It's emphatic that we have to recognize that humanity is one, that there's only one race, the human race, that he has instructions and principles. The the pivot, if you will, around which all the teachings of the Baha'i faith revolve, is the establishment of unity in diversity. That not uniformity, that uniformity is destructive, but diversity is the critical thing. And he lays out the essentials for a global system of governance for all countries. He emphasizes not only the equality of men and women, but also the need for greater involvement of women in affairs of the world as an existential need for this world. He says that science and religion are in accord, and one without other is ineffective and meaningless. And he talks about elimination of all forms of prejudice and avoidance of conflict and strife. So I'm going towards the end. One central figure of Baha'i faith, which is very important to us, is that Baha'u'llah appointed his son, whose name was, we call him Abdul Baha, which means in Arabic, servant of Baha, to be the head of the faith. He was with his father from the age of 8 as a prisoner and in exile. In 1905, when the Young Turks Revolution took place and dissolved the Ottoman Empire, he, like other political and religious prisoners, were freed. During his life, the Baha'i faith expanded to many countries, including in the US, that it arrived in the US in 1893. In 1912, Abdul Baha, at the invitation of the growing Baha'i communities in the West, traveled to Europe, Germany, France, Switzerland, England, Britain, and also came to US, that he spent 11 months in the US, going from coast to coast and giving talks at homes, churches, synagogues, mosques, and other community centers. And what might be interest to this group is that while he was in Boston, he gave a talk at the American Unitarian Association conference at the Tremont Temple on the 22nd of May in 1912. He said, religion is the outer expression of the divine reality. Therefore, it must be living, vitalized, moving, and progressive. If it be without motion and non-progressive, it is without the divine life. It is dead. The divine institutes are continuously active and evolutionary. Therefore, the revelation of them must be progressive and continuous. All things are subject to reformation. This is a century of life and renewal. I won't read the rest, but I will leave it there if you like to. You can. Abdul Baha passed away on November 1921 in Haifa, Israel. And this year is the 100th anniversary of his passing. The Baha'i community is organizing a commemoration of that by showing a film about him. It's going to be on Saturday, the 27th of November. Lady Maparian, who some of you have met from Wellesley College, is going to introduce the film. And if you're interested, I can send you the registration information. Now, as I said, Baha'is don't have clergy. Our affairs are administered at local, regional, national, and international levels by elected assemblies. These are, on the right side, there's the picture of the US delegates to the National Baha'i Convention. They are meeting at the Baha'i Temple in Wilmette, Illinois, to elect the National Assembly of the Baha'is of the US. On the left side on the corner are the 1,100 or so delegates, international delegates from all over the world, who gather every 5 years in Haifa, Israel, to elect the Baha'i international body, which is called, we call it the Universal House of Justice. The Baha'i International Headquarters, Baha'i World Center, is located on the slopes of Mount Carmel. And you can see the picture on top is a depiction of some of the buildings associated with the Baha'i World Center there. Quickly, there are 5 million Baha'is. We're in 100,000 localities. We come from 2,100 different indigenous tribes, races, ethnic groups. There are 188 national councils. We engage in hundreds, if not, we engage in thousands of socioeconomic development programs. 900 of them are large scale. We have 600 schools, over 770 development agencies. There are 10 Baha'i houses of worship in Australia, Cambodia, Uganda, Colombia, Germany, etc. And we have several more in places like Democratic Republic of Congo, New Guinea, in Bihar Sharif in India, and Matunda Soy in Kenya, and Tana in Vanuatu that are under construction at this time. The Baha'i community has been a member of the United Nations non-governmental organization since 1948, and we're very active in a lot of its various councils and subsidiary departments. The Baha'i literature has been translated into 800 languages. We have about 1 million people visit the Baha'i shrine and terraces on Mount Carmel in Haifa. This was before COVID. And in Iran, the Baha'i faith, where it originated, there are 300,000 Baha'is, which are basically the largest non-Muslim religious minority. The Baha'i houses of worship that I mentioned are very interesting and for many reasons. One is that they are all round, and the reason why they're round is to symbolically show the openness to everyone to come and worship there. It's not exclusive by any means to Baha'is. It's open strictly to everyone. So, and the second thing is that they are always designed by taking into account the local culture and the local situation. The one on the top right was built in the 1950s in Kampala, Uganda. The one on the left is one of the more recent ones, was built in Santiago, Chile. It depicts, in the foothills of the Andes Mountain, it depicts a wind movement. The one on the lower left is the Baha'i house of worship in Delhi, India. It's called the Lotus Temple. It's built in the shape of a lotus flower. It has about 4 million visitors a year. And the one on the bottom right is the one in Wilmette, Illinois, which is now the oldest Baha'i house of worship in the world. There was one before it that was built in Uzbekistan, but since then it's been destroyed. And the shrine, the Bab, after he was executed, his body was thrown in a moat. His followers gathered his remains, kept it, and it took a 50-year journey to end up on the slopes of Mount Carmel. So what you see on Mount Carmel is the shrine of the Bab. It is the first building in Israel that had night lighting. And it's lit every night, except during some bombardments, rockets were fired, so they were required to turn it off. And the reason why Baha'is do that is, you remember that story of the candle that I told you about the Bab? So with the memory of that candle, we make sure that his temple, his shrine is lit. And also outside of Akka is a shrine of Baha'u'llah, which is now, you can see it's a form of gardens, and it's being slowly developed. So I stop here, and I'm going to stop the share. And I don't know how long it took, and answer any questions you have. I don't know, I think I took about more than half an hour, sorry.
That's okay. Okay, so if people, we'll start with Bob. I know has been waiting very patiently, and
Sorry,
but
Bob.
then if people can just unmute, you can wave your hand, and we'll just take people one by one. Okay, Bob, are you there?
He gave up.
I guess he, okay, we'll come back to him. Well, I'd like to start with a question. Can you tell us more about the relationship between the Baha'i and the temple is in Israel, but also in the whole Middle East? What are the relationships nowadays?
Well, Baha'u'llah was exiled to what was at that time part of the Ottoman Empire. So the Baha'is have been in Israel long before the state of Israel was formed. So as a community, we do not accept financial support from anybody. who's outside of the faith. Only Baha'is can contribute. So all the temples you saw and the shrine on Mount Carmel were built by Baha'is and Baha'i funds. So we don't accept any funds from the Israeli government. We have very cordial and good relations with the state of Israel, obviously, because we've been there. And they're very respectful of other religions and protective of the holy sites. So that's been there. In the rest of Middle East, it's not so. The Baha'i faith is severely persecuted in Iran, the place where of its birth, still, especially after the revolution in Iran, the Islamic Revolution. In other countries, most other countries, it's banned. So you can't openly be, in Saudi Arabia, you can't be a Baha'i. If you're Baha'i, you can be in trouble. In others, like the UAE countries, they are open, more open to the Baha'is. The Baha'is can have organization. Jordan is a bit friendlier, but not elsewhere. I don't know, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Okay. Other people? Gail?
Oh, I just want to say that I used to live in Evanston and I have visited the beautiful, beautiful Baha'i church in Wilmette. And are they all like 9-sided? And
correct.
there were 9 gardens too?
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
9 is a symbol. It could be a symbol of the 9 major religions. It's a number that it's the highest single-digit number. It's really nothing special about that. You know, it's 9. So we, again, the symbolism of being open to all faiths is really this. And we don't call them church; we call them temples.
Mhm.
Priscilla? You've got to unmute.
I was wondering in the Boston area, greater Boston area or throughout the New England area, how many temples there would be?
We don't have any temples in the U.S. other than the one in Wilmette.
Oh.
And we had a Baha'i center in Boston where it was a place that we met, but we mostly meet in each other's homes. We have our monthly events at each other's homes. Only India has more than one temple because of the large number of Baha'is there. And so I hope that answers your question.
Tony?
You mentioned there's no clergy or anything like that, but I think you may have just partially answered my question though. But do you gather at all as a community?
Yes, we have different types of gatherings, I guess. One is the monthly gathering, which we call it the feast. Actually, we call it the 90-day feast. This is the administrative, if you will, coming together. We come together, we say prayers, we consult about the affairs of the community, or what we need to do, you know, if there are any issues that the community wants to bring to the attention of the assembly, they bring it up there. So it's a consultative process, and then there's refreshments and socializing that take place. But each of us also organize our own devotional activity. So for example, some of you might have been to our devotional that we hosted on Saturday nights, where it's in fact, I remember one devotional that we had one Saturday night. One of the local UU churches sent a group of kids to come and attend, and they came, and that night we had invited Artemis Tchaikovsky, who had made that movie about his grandparents, the Sharps, who were Unitarians, who had gone behind the German lines to rescue Jewish children. And we shot the movie, and afterwards they said, well, yeah, but what is your events like? And we said, well, this was our event. It's not unusual for us to present something that has to do with some other religion, especially, for example, now with Islam being under attack. Very often we have speakers who describe Islam and explain, issues about that. So, yes, so we do have devotionals, and you're very welcome to attend them anytime you want.
Bob.
Bob, are
Bob.
you there?
You may have just, there.
Yep. Bob, did you have a question? Yes. Can you unmute?
Are you asking, which Bob are you asking?
You
Oh,
had
no,
your
I didn't-
hand up?
I did?
Yeah.
If I did, it wasn't intentional.
Okay.
You caused quite a stir.
Well, I am sorry about that.
How do you remove the hand?
That's kind
That
of funny.
pesky hand.
Yeah, I have no idea. I don't even
How are
know
you
how to
doing,
put up
Bob?
a hand. Anyway,
Okay, Tad?
Hey, Ramin, Tad Staley, I met you a couple years ago. This is great. Thank you very much for this. I didn't know the full background. It's quite a story. And I'm wondering, seems like such an inclusive faith, and open and welcoming. Do members of the Baha'i community, do they also participate in other religious communities? I mean, are there Christians who are also?
If we are invited, we do. We don't do it on a regular basis, or it's not. I mean, I went to a Church of England school, so I went to chapel every Sunday and participate in the readings and whatnot. So we certainly don't have any aversion or disinclination to do it. But we don't do it as a normal course of event because we have our own principle, we have our own events that take place and we participate in. But if you're invited, we go. It's not, there's no reason for us not to do it, if you will.
Wait, I have one other sort of almost, a non-religious question, but I love this notion of 19 months of 19 days each. It's so symmetrical. It comes to 361, so there are 4 or 5 extra days. How do you determine when those other days fall?
We go from the first day is usually the 21st of March, and the intercalary days are between the 18th and 19th months, and those are so it's before the fast, before the month of fasting begins. We have this intercalary days, which are days of gift giving and celebration, and then we go to the fast, and then at the end of the fast is the New Year. We celebrate the vernal equinox and the New Year. It's interesting. You're giving me all very soft questions. I thought what Baha'u'llah's claims are challenging. And I might get some questions or pushback on that, but you're giving me the soft stuff. Wow.
Well,
okay, so,
I'll ask another.
Wait.
So,
Bob, go ahead.
all right,
Bob,
so I actually do have a question now. So, faith and reason. Are the things that Baha'is take on faith, or are you all about your head and reason?
Well, both. The only thing, if you will, that even that I would question whether it's on faith alone, is that human beings are fundamentally spiritual beings. So my life is life of science. I consider myself a very skeptical person in general. But through my own personal experience, I have come to this conclusion that human beings are more than just a biological being. And I can argue, I mean, if you will, I can discuss it, I can go back and forth with someone who doesn't think that, but I believe that we are fundamentally spiritual beings. And once you think of that, then a whole lot of things come into place. So for example, the idea of doing good, the idea of happiness, that you cannot be happy by just material means, that you also have to have, these spiritual qualities, kindness, love, selflessness, and these things in order to be fulfilled. Those kind of fit in together. We don't, for example, so the idea of, for example, Christ, say, returning on clouds, we don't think that that is what's going to happen, or a miracle that is against the laws of nature. We don't think that happens. And we don't think religion really works that way, that a lot of what has become part of the sort of the non-scientific part of religion, if you will, is what's been added later. It's been part of the interpretation. So we interpret them differently and we understand them differently. I don't know if that really responded to your question. So for example, if Baha'u'llah says, if you're sick, go to the best doctor you can find and listen to what he says. He said that if religion is not in accordance with logic and science, it's superstition. And on the other hand, he says, if science without religion is materialism and destructive. So we can see that. I mean, we can see that in our lives. Sorry, anybody else? Oh, Wendy.
Yeah, so you're saying that that you don't consider God as an active force in life, like you are.
No, we do. We do.
Okay.
In a spiritual sense. So that, yes, we do believe that you pray, you seek, and that the prayer is a very important part of a human being's need to communicate and to connect with that source of spiritual being, because as Baha'u'llah puts it, it provides insights, it provides context, perspective, it also addresses the need of the soul to connect with that power source of the creative force of the universe, if you will, and all existence. And we don't believe that this world is the only plane of existence, that there are many other worlds of God in other planes of existence. Bob DeNoble.
Yes. So what is the view of an afterlife for Baha'is?
Yes. We believe that the afterlife is very similar to the process of the child being born into this world. It's a sense of going to a different level of existence, which is a spiritual. So we have our own individual identities, but we are a form that is not constrained by time or space. That it is, there's no heaven or hell, but heaven is a process of, if you have advanced spiritually, you've developed your spiritual qualities, you're more in heaven and less in hell. And if you haven't, if you're a cruel despot, you're more in hell and less in heaven. It's a relative state of development based on the spiritual growth that we achieve in this world.
Right. So one of the other rituals that we understand is that when a Baha'i person dies, they get buried very quickly, I believe, and they get buried within, was it 1 hour of where their death occurred?
Yes, you cannot, and there's a reason for that. I explained that. You cannot remove, you can't take the body from one place to another place for more than an hour's journey. Now, the reasons for that are manifold. One is that there is in some cultures, Islamic cultures for sure, I'm sure in Christian cultures, there was this tradition of taking, and Jewish culture too, of taking the body to a holy place. So you carry the body for months and, to take it somewhere to, to bury it near some other place. Baha'u'llah says, obviously the soul has left the body, so the body is not, but out of respect for the body that was the vessel in which the soul existed, we should bury it, in a reasonable period of time and allow it to decompose naturally. We don't have also, for example, unless you live in a place like Japan, we don't have cremation.
Mhm, mhm. No, that's interesting. So I'm thinking of a particular situation where a older couple, the husband died a few years ago, and he's buried in one location, but her children, his widow, and she's now living farther away because they're with children, and so the idea of being buried together.
Yeah, no, that's true. But we have our own faith. One of the central figures of our faith died in London, and he's buried in London. I mean, natural place for him to have been buried would have been to be in Haifa, Israel, but he is in London, so that's the way it, unfortunately, it goes. Now, what's the wisdom of it? I don't know. I think one of the principles that we have in our faith, and I didn't mention it, that's my negligence, is what Baha'u'llah calls independent investigation of truth. That everyone has to independently for themselves investigate whatever is considered to be truth and believe it or reject it. So once, for me, say as a Baha'i, once I am convinced of who Baha'u'llah was and that he was who he said he was, then something like this principle, I may not understand it, but it's not so critical for me in terms of determining the truth of his message or not. So I go along, okay, I have to be buried in, within an hour, that's, so be it.
So what if somebody decides? So the other question that comes to mind is, how related is Baha'i to the Muslim faith? I mean, I understand the conflict that occurred and so forth, but some of the Muslim tenets, if you will, I think are embedded in somewhat. And
absolutely.
So
I think the best way to respond is that the relationship between Baha'i faith and Islam is similar to the relationship between Christianity and Judaism. Jesus was a Jew, and Baha'u'llah was a Muslim, and the Bab was a Muslim. So, and since we don't really distinguish, we say that the Quran, the Holy Book of Muslim, is a revelation of God, the same way as we consider the New Testament to be a revelation from God and the Old Testament. We don't believe it's literally correct, if you will. It has to have some interpretation in terms of understanding what those, because they're from so long ago, but that that Jesus was and Moses were, from the same source. So there's no conflict for us. In Islam, for example, in Islam, we have prayers for 5 times. So we do it once. You fast 28 days. You have some certain forms of violence are allowed. They're not allowed in the Baha'i faith. So there are differences, but the differences are more to do with the exigencies of the time. They're more of the needs of the time, but the fundamental spiritual principles of all these faiths are the same. Does it answer your question?
yes, thank you.
Linda?
You're muted.
You've got to
You're
unmute.
muted.
There you go.
There you go.
Okay.
Linda, you had a question?
I did. My question is this: do you foresee ever in your lifetime the world religions coming together? The National Council of Churches was predicated on doing that. And I noticed on one of your slides that that is the hope.
What Baha'u'llah said is that they are one. Whether they come together or don't come together, in reality, they are one. Now, will the churches come together or not? Baha'u'llah said that this is the opportunity for humanity to come together in unity and recognize its oneness. If humanity doesn't do it, it will suffer. As I read the letters, for example, to the kings that he wrote to them. He, for example, to the king of Germany, to Kaiser Wilhelm, he said, look, if you don't do it, it's going to be, destruction. In fact, he said, I see the Berlin, even though today is in conspicuous glory, to be destroyed twice, he said. So the idea is, the divine plan, as Baha'u'llah explained it, is for humanity to advance. Part of our advancement is at some point we will achieve that great peace. But it's going to have to be an act of volition on our part, how we do it and when we do it. As we don't do it, we suffer. All the environment, the environment that we're talking about, the disunity that is, we are always on the verge of disastrous war. It's that Baha'u'llah says that when enough people recognize and work on advancing that principle of unity and understanding the essential oneness of humanity, then we will begin to create that, what he called the most great peace. It's inevitable. It will come. Now, whether it will be in my life, it will definitely not be in my lifetime. And when it will be, it's up to us how we respond to that message, as it was to those kings.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Gail?
I think one of the
Quote?
quotes was that you don't participate in politics. Can
Absolutely.
you talk
Yes.
more about that?
Yes.
Do you vote?
Yes, we vote.
Mhm.
It's a civic duty to vote, and we vote, and we take our voting very seriously. But we do not, we are forbidden to participate in partisan politics because it's divisive. The whole very existence of the Baha'i faith is to work towards harmonious and collaborative rather than competitive relationships and processes. And our political system is the most destructive adversarial system that there is. I mean, not ours, everywhere. It's not a system that is conducive towards harmonizing and bringing people together for collaboration. In fact, there was a recent book called High Conflict by Ripley, who was a reporter for New York Times, in which she actually takes the Baha'i electoral process as an example of a system that can avoid conflict while we're trying to solve problems. We do it through a process called consultation. And consultation is that when you're discussing to solve a problem, when you present an idea, that idea is no longer yours. That idea becomes the groups to decide and evaluate and decide to keep or to reject. And in our elections, we don't have candidacy. You can vote for any member of the community that you wish. And the 9 who get the highest votes become the members. You're not congratulated for becoming a member. It's not an honor. It's an opportunity of service. So the culture, the attitude towards administration is very different than what is current in our political system. That's why we don't participate in it. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Uh-oh, I'm sorry. Can I call you back? Is it unmuted?
Bob.
Yeah,
Bob's
yeah.
smart. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I'm curious what you just said. You don't participate. Does that mean that Baha'is will not run for political office?
That's correct. That's absolutely correct.
You have so much to offer, though.
we do get appointed to whatever. I mean, if somebody gets appointed to do a job, they would do the job in the government if they're appointed, but they will not run for election and they would not take positions in political parties. I cannot be a Democrat Baha'i or a Republican Baha'i. That would be completely contrary to the principle of being a Baha'i.
With the political people.
Robert Smart.
What's happened? You know, is that?
Okay, so I do have a follow-up on this, on the politics thing.
I'm sure you do.
I've talked to several Quakers, and Quakers have meetings, and sometimes they have to make decisions like who the next president of the meeting is going to be, or are we going to sell the property or buy the property or buy another property? You know, decisions get made, you know, by any organization. They don't vote. They don't count votes. They talk until they come to consensus, which, you know, like for most of us, I'd like, you got to be kidding me. But that's, as I understand it, that's what they do. Is that true in the Baha'i organization as well?
We vote.
You
So
vote, okay.
the Baha'i Assembly, which is 9 people, let's say a property that we have to decide what to do about this property. We designate somebody to find all the facts about, you know, what's going on in the market, what's wrong with the property, or this is why right, wrong, whatever. We get all the facts, we sit down and we discuss it. Or we call it consult about it. So somebody can say, I think we should sell it and these are my reasons. The difference is that when that person says that, then they can come back and try to defend what they said. You know, in a sense, it goes into the pot, and now everybody will. It removes the chance of it becoming a conflict, and that's the way we do. And at the end of it, when it's all done, we vote. Hopefully, it's unanimous, and if it's not, majority vote. And then everybody's supposed to follow it. You can't have a minority opinion that said, oh, no. I think, you know, constant sort of agitation. No, I don't think we should have done that decision. Once it's decided, we all have to agree with it and go with it.
Thank you.
Sure.
Becky?
This is in the same vein. 2 questions. Do you get called upon to be to arbitrate or to help resolve conflicts between parties, or is this just too hard because that's not, you're sort of dealing in a certain culture that you've developed?
So if you're called upon to do something, And for example, a few years ago in Israel, there was an Israeli soldier who was killed, and because his religious orientation was such that he wasn't being allowed to be buried in any of the Jewish cemeteries. And obviously the other religions would not do it. So the state of Israel turned to the Baha'is and asked them if they could come up with a solution for this. And the Baha'is, of course, said, of course, no problem. You can bury him in the Baha'i cemetery. So if you're called upon to address a certain situation that requires us to do something, and we can do it within the bounds of our own principles, we'll do it. In many places, in villages, for example, the Baha'i assembly is called upon to arbitrate something, even though the people are not Baha'is. But as long as they agree with the principle to do it, they'll do it. It's not, I mean, we are there to be of service. And if that's the service that we can be, then we do it.
Mm. And do you have situations where if people are falling somehow outside the general, who are Baha'i, but who fall outside, take them outside of the normal culture, how do you handle those kinds of situations?
Good question. First of all, we don't have morality police. So we are very dependent on the individual maturity to decide what, how they manage the Baha'i laws and principles. So we don't go and looking, Baha'u'llah said you have to have a fault covering eye. And with that phrase, fault covering eye. So in that way, we don't go around looking for people doing this. Now, if there is something very blatant, and it's brought to the assembly's attention that a Baha'i is breaking a certain law. Let's say I'm seeing this Baha'i in a pub every night, he's getting drunk. What do we do? And the assembly is supposed to try to resolve it, to help, and if it comes to the point where it can't happen, and the person is very insistent, then the administrative penalty that comes is usually called is an administrative punishment, if you will. And that is, you can't contribute to the Baha'i fund, and you can't vote in the Baha'i elections. So those are, you can attend Baha'i meetings, you can join the feasts and the activities, but you can't do those administrative functions that are part of being a Baha'i.
Interesting.
Janet.
Thank you.
Hi, I had some friends, some married friends who were Baha'i, and they were having difficulty in their marriage. And they said that in their faith, they weren't allowed to divorce. They had to spend a year apart and then come together. Anyway, they reconciled after a year and had much greater happiness. I wondered if you would talk about that a little bit.
So what it is, if a couple are having difficulties, they can go to the assembly, and the assembly tries to advise them, help them, do whatever needs to, maybe part of the advice, go and see a, counselor or marriage, professional counseling or therapy and all that. And if that doesn't work and there is, divorce is really discouraged, if so, try to do everything to avoid it. But if there is this resentment and that the couple are not going to be able to make it, then they're supposed to have a cooling off period of 1 year. It's called the year of patience, where you live apart, but at the same time you try to work it. You see if you can make it work. If it can't work at the end of the year, then you can have the Baha'i divorce.
Thank you. I also wanted to ask you to say a little bit more about, you said that there was a need for greater involvement of women, and Does that
Yeah.
go back to the very origins of the faith?
Absolutely. In fact, one could argue the very first woman advocate for women's liberation was in the ranks of the Baha'i faith in the early 1800s. One of the, in fact, number 17 follower of the Bab was a woman by the name of Tahireh. She broke just about every norm of the time. First, she was a scholar, a religious scholar who was respected. Secondly, he took the veil off in public, causing tremendous consternation because she was looked at as a saint. And then when she did that, that caused a lot of problems. And eventually she was put to death. And the last words she said that you can kill me, but you're not going to stop the course of the freedom of women and the rights of women. So it is very much, in fact, the Baha'i writings, Abdul Baha said very explicitly, not until women become more involved in the affairs of the community will we have peace in the world. So when I said existential need for greater involvement by women, that's what I meant.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, Ramin, I want to just thank you so much. This has just been such an enlightenment, and I think there's just so much in your faith that is so admirable that I think we all have been able to learn and to it's given us something to think about. So we thank you so much for being here.
I'm grateful to you. Thank you. That was
Yes.
a wonderful.
Linda, did you want to say something too?
No,
Okay.
it's been a wonderful evening,
Yes, it has.
everyone.
Just great. Thank you so
okay.
much.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks for me.
Good,
Good
thank you.
night.
Thank you, Robin.
Bye-bye. Bye, Sissy. You were in hiding.
We're here though.
Very nice.
Camera's still up.
Good night.
Good
See you
night.
Sunday.
Good night.
See you. Yes.
Okay.
Okay.